Hey, folks, welcome back to the Mac and Mike Show. This is Christmas week, and on Christmas Day, the President of the United States ordered strikes on the Islamic State extremists or terrorists in the nation state of Nigeria. Now, after the fact, after the attacks occurred, the Nigerian government issued a statement saying that the strikes on the Islamic State terrorists near the border were, in fact, a joint operation and in cooperation, conducted in cooperation with Nigeria. Um, I hope that's true. I hope that we didn't do this without getting agreement and cooperation by the Nigerian government. Mike and I are going to talk a little bit today about the idea of attacking anyone, terrorist or anyone, or army, military, in another nation, whether or not the Congress of the United States has declared war. And I think, the justification for attacking these Islamic State terrorists in Nigeria was that the Nigerian government was not doing enough to protect the Christians. And this was really an act to save Christians who were being, we're talking about genocide. All the Islamic terrorists were absolutely killing groups, hundreds, thousands, maybe tens of thousands of Christians in the nation of Nigeria. Nigeria, for those of you that don't know, is about 220 million people. And it's about 50-50 Christian and Islamic. So the question that Mike and I wanted to talk about, and I asked Mike if he would indulge me, was um, what powers of the president? What are the powers of the president? Does he have the authority to? I don't think there's any question that the Constitution gives him authority to use the military to protect and defend the nation, our nation of America, and to protect American citizens. No doubt in my mind. I'm not real sure that I see the American interest or the American citizens who are at risk that would justify this attack in Nigeria. And if the president can use I mean, in the past, our attacks on terrorists were justified by the AUMF, the Authorization for the Use of Military Forces, after 9/11 occurred. It wasn't a declaration of war, but it did authorize us to go after terrorists. There's a function of either the Patriot Act or some of the legislation that came after 9/11 that allows the president to identify certain groups of people as terrorist organizations, and if they are identified by executive order, gives the president authority to take out those terrorist groups. That's what he's doing outside of Venezuela, by the way, with the drug boat. That's At least there's a law that specifically allows him to do those kinds of things once a group of individuals or a nation state, for that fact, are declared a terrorist. In this case, he declared the administration of Venezuela a narco terrorist, and he started taking out these drug boats. So, Mike, the question I want to pose to you, and I know that you have an erudite answer for this, what are the powers of the presidency? This attack on the Islamic State, and it may have been Boko Haram too, I'm not real sure, but these attacks that America conducted on Islamic terrorists in the nation of Nigeria, are they justified or not? And they might be justified, but are they, what's the word I'm looking for? Do we have some basis in American law or constitution that allows the president to do this?
Yeah, well, from what I know, was the Constitution Article 2 and the AUMF would authorize that kind of action because it's broadly interpreted. I think people have been pushing for a more narrow interpretation, and I do believe that it's time for Congress to remove that authorization for military force and narrow the focus of it, because we don't want, not just Trump, we don't want any president just going around willy-nilly taking on things that the entire American people don't support. Now, there's the argument that as commander in chief, a president is going to have more intelligence at his disposal than the average American or even congressman. Now they have these intel committees that, they can have some level of understanding of why a president might take this kind of action, and they'll deliberate amongst themselves, and then each side will report to the General Assemblies. But, if we can't even get an immigration law passed that's more narrowly focused than it is today, I don't know if we ever will get the AUMF more narrowly focused. But, Mac, you're right. There's a lot of people asking this question. There's a lot of varying opinions. And like you go to the law in the Supreme Court, you're always left with an opinion. That's what it's called. When they hand down a ruling, it is an opinion. So I really don't know where people will fall on this. I know personally, a lot of my friends that are Trump supporters don't like this type of action. Not just there, but the Venezuelan boats, etc.
Well, I think this president has taken a very liberal view of what his powers are with the military. As you know, he has put a blockade around the nation of Venezuela. He's stopping oil from being shipped from Venezuela. And I believe the U.S. military has commandeered at least two tankers, maybe three. And, our intention is to not give those tankers or those that oil back to Venezuela. And since there have been sanctions, legal sanctions placed on exporting that oil to certain nations, I guess I can find my way to accept the approval the authorization, I guess, for the president to do those actions in Venezuela. I'm not real sure that I can find my way to seeing how the president has authorization to strike any kind of terrorist on foreign soil in a sovereign nation state, and that concerns me. And not so much, obviously we're talking about an action that's a very great distance away, and repercussions of those actions are not realistic. I mean, I don't expect the nuclear missile to be headed our way because we attacked the ISIS state, the Islamic State, in northwestern Nigeria. But I do think that acceptance of this decision establishes a precedent. And you said an opinion, Mike. If you remember, first there was the Dred Scott case, then there was the segregation cases that separate but equal, and then it wasn't okay to be separate but I mean, those things that have gone before the Supreme Court in the past have oftentimes been ruled, and then the ruling changed, right? I mean, we don't have to go that far back to remember when Roe versus Wade was the law of the land, and then the Supreme Court said, we were wrong. Yeah, it really, the states can do it. So you're right. An opinion can be swayed by public opinion, and but here's the real concern that I have. If the president can order attacks on a Islamic terrorist group in the nation of Nigeria, is it that much of a stretch to see the president order a strike on the drug cartels in Mexico? And I think that that's a different issue for me. There is some justification with the drugs that are coming into this nation, killing Americans. You could say he is protecting Americans if he attacks the drug cartels. But I think importantly, it's whether or not we would take some kind of action in conjunction with the Mexican government. And I think it's also important that Congress have a say in this. Doing a military action on a faraway land is one thing. Whether the justification is reasonable or not. Again, I don't know how killing Islamic State terrorists because they're killing Nigerian Christians is in the national interest of the United States of America or is protecting the American people. Now, you could argue, of course, that any kind of genocide anywhere, there's a responsibility for all civilized nations to take action. But it seems to me we're picking and choosing which genocide we want to support and which genocide we want to stop. And I think that, based on who's president, Mike, this is a really slippery slope. I mean, we may generally agree with President Trump stopping Islamic terrorists from killing Christians en masse, genocide. Um, we may or may not agree with the United States of America attacking drug cartels in Mexico. But what if there is a president of a different party and they use the same kind of logic to attack something that we don't support? I'm sure there are many people in the liberal side of our political divide that aren't happy with the president taking this kind of power to eradicate terrorists in this fashion.
Yeah, I mean, you're raising a very good point, Mac. Um, I could see, trying to flip the script a little bit. As much as Democrats dislike Israel now, you could almost see a future event, maybe not right now, but at some point in the future, where the United States attacks Israel on behalf of Palestinians. You might smile at that, but you think
No, it's an idea I hadn't thought of, but I can see your rationale in it. And yet, the smile was one of recognition, Mike, not of the rise.
Yeah, I mean, it is a little bit of a stretch, but the vast majority of Democrats at this point, I think, are anti-Semitic for the most part, at least the younger generation. So in the future, as they mature into adults, if the preceding generations come up, with the same dislike for anything Jewish or Israeli, you could see where they come on the side of an anti-Israeli stance. We could possibly see something like that on the opposite side of the Ukraine war and different places in the world. But yeah, it's difficult. But before we got on the recording, I said I'd much prefer to see President Trump attacking drug cartels, or at least, the embargo is an interesting thing. It's not exactly, it's not kinetic. I mean, there's been kinetic actions taken against boats, at sea in international waters. Kinetic action somewhat taken with the oil tankers. They didn't kill anyone, but they boarded them. And an embargo sort of doesn't put our troops at risk. And I think, being military, you and I, that's the number one thing. We don't want to see anyone on our side give their lives for something we don't believe in or doesn't directly affect the American interest, right?
Right.
So, I mean, you're raising some very, very good points. I do believe, like I said, that President Trump has the authority under the current Constitution and AUMF, which needs to be modified, in my opinion. I think Rand Paul brings this up a lot, that they need to modify, or you either need to renew, modify the AUMF, or get congressional authorization for this type of kinetic action.
Mike, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1941, the first thing that Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was president at the time, did was he did his radio program and he asked publicly, and then he asked, in a private way as well, for the United States Congress to declare war on Japan. And I guess what I'm getting at is that when the Japanese conducted a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor and literally killed thousands of Americans, destroyed a couple of warships, but badly damaged others, to try to take our strength away from the Pacific naval fleet. The president didn't immediately order an attack on Japan. He didn't immediately order retribution on Japan. He waited for the declaration of war by Congress, which is what it calls for in the Constitution. So I'm a little bit uncomfortable with any president And generally, I'm a supporter of this president's policies, by the way. And I think that it's a difficult thing to stand for the international community to stand by and watch literally tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Christians be murdered by these terrorists and nothing be done. And the government of the United States asked the government of Nigeria several times to stop this terrible tragedy from occurring, and nothing has been done. So I understand the desire to protect defenseless people. I understand that. But what I don't understand is how the president has that authority. And I'd really like to be educated as to how he got that authority, or if it is included in the AUMF, that it doesn't seem like to me. But I really do believe that it's righteous for our Congress to declare war. And as much as we may not like what's going on in Nigeria, I'm not real sure that there are Americans at risk or American national interest at risk. And therefore, again, I don't want to say the same thing twice using different words, but if this president can do it in Nigeria, then why can't he do it in other places? And the second part of that is if this president is not president anymore, and I don't like the new president's policies, as you noted, what if America decides to because we don't like what Israel is doing in Palestine, to attack Israel? I mean that you're right. That's kind of far fetched, but it's in the same area of precedent, right? Why not?
Well, yeah. And while you were speaking, I have another screen open where I went to Grok. And, AI isn't everything. You might get different answers using different AIs. And I asked the question if Trump does have that. And it comes back and it says, yes, as commander in chief under Article 2, like I said in the Constitution, President Trump has broad authority to conduct military operations against terrorists abroad, including in response to threats like those posed by Islamic State affiliates in Nigeria and Al Qaeda. So, groups similar. They couldn't list all the Islamic groups, so they just said similar groups, and that falls under the AUMF. Now, maybe I'd find different answers if I dug deeper, because when you're using AI, you have to continue to ask questions and cross-check it against other artificial intelligences.
Yep, that's what I was going to ask ChatGPT or one of the other AIs.
Yeah, Gemini, I'm finding, by the way, that I like more. ChatGPT, yeah, it's out there, but let's go ahead and talk, and I'll look it up on Gemini.
Well, the point I'm trying to get to, Mike, is how much power in the hands of the single individual is too much. Declaration of war is in the Constitution is being required by the Congress of the United States. So if we were not willing to attack Japan for their surprise attack, how can we attack terrorists without having an authorization of war? And I understand the AUMF and now even that authorization of Article 2, I truly believe this is going on memory. I don't want to say something that's wrong. But I think that was intended for defense of the nation. And, I'm not real sure how these Islamic State terrorists were threatening America. I still don't believe they were. Not that I'm arguing that somebody shouldn't have done something to stop the Islamic terrorists of ISIS State or Boko Haram, whoever's involved, from killing Christians. That's a noble thing. But does one man in the United States have the authority to do that when America itself is not at risk? Maybe he does. Maybe he does. And if he does, I'm still concerned about the next president, who we may not necessarily agree with all the time. And as you said, one of my big concerns is a friend of mine. His son is Special Forces Air Force, and my grandson is in the process of training to be Special Forces Army. And if the United States of America decides that the drug cartels killing, what is it? Is it 70,000 people a year or something? I don't know what the number is.
Oh, the numbers fluctuate quite a bit, and they're coming down because he's president. But yeah,
well, they're down because
100,000.
Yeah, we're closing the border, and it's becoming a little bit more difficult for them to get across the border illegally. But you know, if we do send troops, special forces, or even drones or missiles to take out drug cartel compounds and individuals, do we have that authorization? And perhaps we do. Again, I feel more comfortable that we have that when the drug cartels are killing Americans because it's the president's duty to protect Americans. But I don't know whether or not that's something we want one person to have that power. I think there should be a debate. I think Congress should take up the question. I think there should be a very clear vote by the representatives of the people. Yes, this is something we want our nation to do. Do you disagree with me?
Not at all. Again, no matter what AI tells us, you and I are thinking through the process as Americans who have had a long time in our lives to live prior to the AUMF and prior to any use of, Article 2 in most cases. Now, just so you know, while you're talking, I did cross reference it. Interesting that Grok and ChatGPT both say yes, he has the authorization. Gemini sort of caveats it and says whether the president has authority is often a matter of intense legal and political debate. And then it goes on to give me the following framework of Constitution, AUMF. But the other end, at the very end, it lists also the War Powers Act. So, as you stated earlier, the AUMF and others would require consent from the nation, which we supposedly heard Nigeria said yes. And the procedural framework for the War Powers Act is the president must notify Congress.
Yes.
I don't know if he notified Congress about this. So
that's the question. Yeah, it's relatively new news, and we don't know all the details yet.
Right. I mean, I guess the general consensus from all the AIs is more or less, yeah, he has the authority. And see, if Congress doesn't like it, if Rand Paul and others gather enough support within Congress, they can stop him.
Yeah,
they can stop him dead in his tracks. So again, it's a matter of national will. These are some of those gray areas that you and I have spoken about before when it comes to a lawful order and things of that nature. It's difficult, but me, just as an opinion, I prefer, unless it's an absolute emergency, I would prefer the president get some kind of authorization from Congress for almost any military action. One side is security. Congress has a habit of just opening their big mouths. So unless you really penalize, see, I was special ops, and you had a security clearance, the Army. I mean, you still have your security clearance, and if you violate your security clearance, you're probably going to prison.
Yep.
And so, if we could enforce severe prison sentences on anyone in Congress or anyone in the staff that might know about a military operation, up to the point of life imprisonment, I would say, okay, let Congress know. The problem is there's no penalty when people violate, their oath of office and security procedures.
Remember when General Miley contacted his communist Chinese counterpart?
They should be in prison for life.
Yep.
Just spinning.
Here's one of my concerns, Mike. The power to declare war resting in the hands of Congress, I feel good about. I will say this, however. Shortly after World War II, something like 70-80% of the representatives in Congress, both houses of Congress, were war veterans. Today, there's a very small percentage of people who serve in Congress who are actual war veterans, who are actual combat veterans, even veterans at all, whether they so I'm not sure that they understand what they're asking of America's military when they commit them to some sort of conflict or some sort of war. That's the first part of it. But the second part of it is that Mike, war. Those of us who have actually seen war up close, war should be the absolute last resort. It should be. There should be every avenue of negotiation should be attempted before determining to declare war. And what I feel most uncomfortable about this action is that it seems to me that this action could open the door for any action that we wanted to justify. As an example, do you know one of the primary factors why the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor? I'll give you the answer because it's an unfair question if you're not a historian who's read up on this. But about 90% of the oil and rubber that went to Japan came through or touched the United States of America, and we embargoed their oil and their rubber. Without oil and rubber, you cannot prosecute a war. So the Japanese were trying to conduct a war without having the necessary raw materials to conduct that war, and they decided that they were going to have to get us out of the way in order to get the needed oil and rubber to keep their military, their army operational. Now, knowing that fact, and that you can read it, you can check me out on that. Read history. That was one of the factors Japan considered when deciding whether or not to attack America. Now, what if? And this is going to sound weird. This is going to sound stupid. This is going to sound impossible to believe. But what if China decided that we get, what do we get? 80 or 90% of our rare earth material from China. What if China decides not to send us rare earth minerals anymore? And that basically stops us in our tracks from many and various different industries. If we no longer are getting rare earth minerals from our friend or enemy, I don't know how you couch the Chinese, is that justification for the president to attack them in some way? Because you see how you mentioned Israel, which maybe it may not be that far off based on some of the things we see in college campuses today. But what is the justification for using military force? I mean, if the killing of Christians by Islamic extremists or terrorists in Africa is a justification for us to go to war, because that's the way I look at this military strike. What if there's a lesser justification? I mean, certainly denying us rare earth minerals is more of a problem for America, for American citizens, than Christians being genocided in Africa. Does that? I mean, I understand the statement is a little bit far fetched, but it makes sense, right?
I think you're 100% on top of that, buddy. I agree, and this also bleeds over into the whole bringing manufacturing back to America and finding ourselves gathering rare earth minerals from places where we have influence. So it also bleeds into the tariff issue, which is the motivation for bringing manufacturing back to America, so that we can't be stopped by our enemies, or frenemies, as you call them, like China. I mean, I remember back in the 90s in the military, I think we were still getting some of our parts for our military hardware from countries that were not friendly to us.
Yes.
It's ridiculous.
Not directly related, but a tangent maybe of what we're talking about. The nation of Greenland, which is a huge geographic territory, supposedly is a territory that belongs to Denmark, right? And
Right.
they're the ones government controls. And yet they are a few miles away from America and Canada, and a great deal farther distance away from Denmark. Is it possible, if we're going to use military force to attack terrorists in Nigeria, is it possible we just send military troops to Greenland and take it?
We don't have to. We already have an Air Force base there.
But my point is, Mike, nobody could stop us if the president wanted to. could he not send troops to Greenland and just take it? And do we want to? I mean, again, the justification: hey, there's gold and there's silver and there's rare earth minerals there. We need all those things. We can't. Our economic environment would be ruined without those. Does that need for those minerals that reside in Greenland? Does that give us the authority to just take it? Isn't
No.
that similar to military action in Africa?
Yeah, no, well, I don't know how. Yeah, I can see how it's related, but no, we to answer it straight, no, we don't have the authority. At least as long as we're part of the United Nations and we agree that we don't invade sovereign countries. But I think it's a pressure move or a leverage move, maybe to allow us to build more bases there. I mean, our big besides rare earth, which we can find other places in the world, the big thing is the Chinese and the Russians are all over that area. And we're worried about as the ice breaks in the north, having the passage of those ships and bringing them closer and who dominates that particular region. We don't want the Chinese and the Russians closing down that Arctic throughway that's going to eventually occur.
Yeah, that's the Greenland debate, and that's not the reason that I brought it up. Obviously we can have that debate on another day and another podcast. But my question really is, Mike, what level of justification permits use of military force in these areas? Again, the terrorists in Africa killing Christians in Africa, it doesn't it's not logic to me. It doesn't make logical sense why the United States of America had any interest there in using our military to take down these Islamic State terrorists. I understand why taking care of terrorists anywhere is a good thing. We don't want terrorists. Who wants terrorists? Are you in favor of terrorists? I'm not in favor of them. But at what point in time does this very slippery slope take us into other areas of decisions to use military force in ways that may not be as clear?
Again, I keep coming back to you're right. I know it's probably more interesting for the audience if I could come up with a disagreement, but I don't have any disagreements. Boy, maybe we should get a whole bunch of people on here. I'd have to find somebody. I think most people are aligned like you and I. And it's a shame that, those of us that support Trump, some people, not me or you, I don't think, but others feel pressure like I can't argue with anything the man does. That's a criticism I keep hearing from some of my Republican friends that are never Trumpers is you MAGA people, and they lump me into this that I'm MAGA, yeah, but do I believe Trump can do no wrong? No, I don't. I mean, that's not the way I look at things. And this is one of those particular areas where I am not real happy with the way things are going because I do see the slippery slope. Like when the Supreme Court looks at things, they look at precedent. So what Donald Trump is doing is setting precedent. Now, I don't know that doesn't influence the Supreme Court, but it influences what the next president might do, like you're saying. He may feel at liberty to do something that leads us to World War III. Who knows? Not that Nigeria is going to do that, but it's true. Nations are sovereign and have some sovereign ability to say what goes on.
There was a story I heard years ago, and I can't confirm that this story is true, but I've heard it oft repeated, so there might be some grain of truth in it. Supposedly, Colin Powell was accused, or either at the UN or at a conference of multiple nations, accused someone said to General Powell that the United States of America was a colonial power. In other words, like England, went to India and other parts of the world and just, put the stamp of the English Empire on it, and other European nations, Portugal, France, and Spain, each of them in their own way did those things. And what Colin Powell's response was, we've gone places and we have fought wars, and the only thing we've asked in return is enough ground to bury our dead. And I think that speaks to, and even today, there are cemeteries in Europe that grateful Europeans still tend the grave sites of dead Americans for what America did for their nation in freeing them during World War II. And I think generally, all generalizations are false, including this one, right, Mike?
Right.
Generally, I think that people have a positive view of America and what we do on the world stage. Not always, right? The Gaza thing, there were a lot of complaints about our support for Israel there. The attack on the Iranian nuclear facilities received some complaints. But generally speaking, America has gone places and make the world a better place. And I think that if we do things like this Nigerian terrorist camp attack, that we run the risk of changing the world's opinion on who and what America is. Are we truly, quote, the guy in the white hat, the good guy? Always are we. And I mean, there's not universal acclaim to the United States now, but generally speaking, most people, I think that America is doing things the right way. Wasn't it? Who was it? Winston Churchill that said the Americans always do the right thing after they've exhausted all other possibilities. So I think, generally speaking, the United States of America does the right thing, or we try. And if we don't do the right thing, most often we admit our mistakes. But I can't wrap my head around this attack on Islamic terrorists in Nigeria, even though I generally believe that the justification was positive, was good motivation. I'm just not sure how America justifies our use of military force in a foreign land on someone who hasn't attacked us. I mean, I know that kind of makes sense to you, Mike, and I guess what I'm searching for, and maybe the third or fourth time, I'm searching for justification so I can say, President Trump did this and it's righteous because, and I don't have that answer.
Well, when you mention the word righteous, I mean, I stop and think back to the Holocaust and Germany, and a lot of people criticized us from not getting involved sooner. And I think it'd be very interesting. You can't trust polls. I just dismiss them. You never know. Like, look how people were supposed to win elections or not, and it just flips the other way. But I wonder what the real sentiment is in America about that. Sure, we want to stop. They killed 60,000 fellow Muslims. The moderate Muslims are being killed in Nigeria too, not just Christians.
Right.
It's like 7,000 Christians and 60,000 moderate Muslims. So there's a human rights aspect to this. I guess you could put it up to the UN and see what they think, or you could put it up to Congress. But this is a global situation. This is not an isolated. I mean, they're everywhere, man. So we'd have to go to a lot of different countries to stomp it out.
Well, again, the purpose for the point I'm trying to make on this in this conversation is what authority and what responsibility and what powers does the individual who sits in the White House, the President of the United States, have to conduct military operations without approval of the representatives of the American people? And I think that, much like the use of executive orders, we've allowed that power to kind of slip away and not be challenged. And I guess that what I would be more comfortable with is if there were some restrictions on that. I'm not at all comfortable with this attack, even though it was claimed to be a joint attack. We've been threatening the government of Nigeria for months to end this genocide, and they've done virtually nothing. I've watched as events have transpired in Venezuela, and the whole sanctions, and I understand the law behind that, and I get I understand seizing the boats, but Maduro in Venezuela has distributed to his general population over 1 million AK-47s. Okay, so if our troops go to Venezuela, and I'm not suggesting that they will or there's a plan to do that, but I don't believe that we can use drone strikes or missile strikes on either the population or the military of Venezuela without some sort of authorization by Congress. And if we do send troops to Venezuela, it's not going to be pretty. It just you know I would not want American military soldiers, sailors, airmen, and marine special forces or regular forces to be sent to Venezuela when they are a sovereign nation and they have not attacked us. Does that make sense to you, Mike?
Oh yeah, of course. But the problem in Venezuela is he's not the duly elected president, according to all the reports. And I don't think we will ever go in with troops. That's just not in our wheelhouse. Um, it's kind of like, remember when Trump was president, or no, prior to Trump, when Obama was president, there was the something spring, Arab Spring in Iran, and people were at the time saying if President Obama had supported the movement against the mullahs, that they may have felt like they had the strength of the U.S. behind them to accomplish an internal revolution.
Right.
Maybe that's what Trump is trying to do here, is say, okay, we know there's a lot of people in your country that know Maduro is illegitimate. It's not who you want. We have your back, kind of, in a sense. Maybe that's what he's just trying to do, show strength. He's also probably trying to intimidate Colombia and Mexico a little bit.
Yeah.
Look, the majority of drugs coming into our country are not coming up by sea. They're coming right over the border in trucks in the different places. And somebody on Facebook said not long ago, yeah, well, why aren't you directly attacking China? Because that's where all the basic fentanyl comes from. And that's what's really killing Americans, not so much cocaine. I mean, all drugs ruin American lives. And you can say it's in America's interest to do it in Venezuela, which you can't make the same argument about Nigeria. So, they're like two different wheelhouses that you have to think about.
Mike, again, I don't want to make this conversation we're having about specific problems, and whether or not we should use military force in Venezuela or Mexico or anywhere else. I guess what I'm really trying to have us focus in on is where's the authority for the president to do this? And are Americans okay with any president having this kind of authority? Should we allow this kind of authority to exist? Again, according to the Constitution, the president has the power to protect and defend this nation. And when I could almost say that attacking the drug cartels would be much more justified than attacking the Islamic State in Nigeria, because I get the link. The cartels shipping. They're not shooting our people, but they might as well be with the drugs. The drugs are every bit as devastating as the shooting for in this nation with the number of deaths that they cause. So I think maybe this conversation we're having should be titled, what is the power of the president? And I think that, we should come up with an acceptable set of rules that govern this kind of behavior by not only this president, because I'm generally a favor, as I've said before, I'm generally in favor of this president. Sometimes I don't like the way he talks, sometimes I don't like the things he says, but I like the for the most part, I like the things he does. And but this one is one of those things that I'm not comfortable with. I'm not comfortable at all, and I think we, the United States of America, because we are such a powerful nation, because we can enforce our will. My son has this favorite saying that he repeats to me often. He says, "Might makes right." And my response to him consistently is, no, it doesn't make, might does not make right, because there is an absolute arbiter of what's right and wrong, and that's the creator, that's our God. So might does not make right. I grant you that might can force people to do certain things that they may not want to do, but it doesn't make it right. And I guess what I'm saying is I want America to be right. I want us to be on the righteous side of the equation of whether or not we want to do these things or not. Look, I'm not saying that taking out the Islamic State terrorists who are perpetrating the genocide of Christians is not righteous, because I believe it is righteous. I'm just saying it has to be done in the right way. That's what I'm saying. And I don't believe this was done in the right way. And I'm concerned that this will set a precedent for other things that may be done in not the right way as well. And I guess that's the whole point of this conversation for me, Mike.
Yeah, that is the point. And just to sum it up, I guess, to remind the audience, according to the three artificial intelligences that are the biggest, he does have the authority. It's, like I said, Gemini, I think, is the only one that's kind of in the middle. But the other two agree, by and large, he has the authority. Now, that doesn't answer the question, as you point out, should he have the authority? So, does he and should he? So, should he? It's got to be up to our legislatures. And it's so funny because whenever the laws are made, it's going to be very contingent on which side of the aisle has the majority in the House and the Senate.
Right.
So nobody, even the next election cycle, people aren't going to be happy, and that's the problem. When the terrorists attacked on 9/11, AUMF came into being. America, both left and right, were fairly united.
Yeah,
So,
Patriot Act, all those other things.
the Patriot Act is a mess. Boy, we could do a whole another hour on that. But yeah, it's a mess. But that's what a representative republic is. Sometimes it's a mess.
Yeah, it's not. What is it? How does that say? Representative republic is not a great form of government. It's just superior to every other one we've tried. Something like
that's
paraphrasing.
You're right, Mac. That's the saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we probably beat this up enough, Mike. I'm not, we how I got Greenland into the same conversation with an attack in Nigeria on ISIS terror, the Islamic State terrorists, is a mystery to me. But I somehow managed to do that, Mike.
Well, it's all about authority, and that's what we're talking about.
Well, didn't you do a review that said McCormick is expressive and interesting to people, and you're the logical kind of bring home the facts, like Sergeant Friday on Dragnet. Just the facts, ma'am. Just the facts.
Yeah, it's interesting. Each one of just to inform the audience. So I took the transcript from several of our podcasts, and I asked for analysis from AI. Well, actually, it suggested it because I asked for a summary, and I usually post that as part of the YouTube description. And then it said, "Would you like me to analyze the speaking styles of Mac and Mike?" And it was a link at the bottom. I said, why not? And I did. Then I started copying in other transcripts. It was very interesting. It keeps coming up with pretty much the same kind of speaking style, no matter which video I popped in. But, next time you come over, we're going to sit here and listen to some of those.
Again, even I'm surprised that I was able to bring Greenland and Nigeria into the same conversation. That is truly a unique ability. Maybe I should be proud of it. Maybe I shouldn't be. But I just realized that I did it. I'm thinking to myself, that's a little bit obtuse, but whatever. I guess we should probably wrap this up, Mike, huh?
All righty.
Mac and Mike.
Out.
Out.